The second thing is a lot of people have asked about slides. In general, just assume you aren't getting the slides. We're going to have a drive that will try and post them as they come in, but a lot of people are working on them, up until the time that they speak, or they just don't want their slides posted. So go on the assumption that you're not getting them, but we will post as many as we can. I think those are all my announcements. There's a QR code up there for those of you who have never seen a QR code before. Almost all of your phones will be able to use that and to go to that link. So just open your phone app and that'll probably solve your problem. If not, your thumbs can type in the top there. So you'll be able to get to this channel here. So that's kind of it for announcements for now. This is a crossover panel from the Summer Institute that's run for the last few days. There's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, mostly sweat because the AC shut off in the building yesterday for them. But this is the first year they've run it. I know there's been a lot of people involved in organizing it. Specifically, I'm going to point out Alana from the Amii team, who's also both been helping on the program committee and is also another CCAI chair from CIFAR. So we're really excited. This is the first year that they've run it. Ted and everybody are going to explain more about what they've been doing the last couple days, and then we're gonna hear from the panel. So thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Spencer. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to be here with you. Ooh, I should speak softly, right?
They should turn you down.
Yeah. Can you turn me down by about 20%, please? I've never asked for that before. And may I just say, of the URLs that are posted there, the Slack channel is an opportunity for you to send questions up to be curated, displayed over there, and offered to the panelists in addition to the sort of iterating live questions that we'll do from the audience. So if you hear things and you want to pose a question, put it on that Slack channel. I'm Ted Parsons. I'm a professor at the law school at UCLA, where I also direct the AI Pulse project on legal, governmental, and societal and ethical issues related to artificial intelligence. As Spencer mentioned, this is a crossover event between the Summer Institute on AI and Society that we've had running for the past 3 days and the Deep Learning Reinforcement Learning Summer School, which is kicking off today. So what do we mean by AI and society? Why is it important to think about this stuff? I don't know whether to say duh or not, right? So you folks, I understand, are brilliant, ambitious, future technical leaders of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we are here to share some of the insights, ideas, provocations, and arguments that we've had about what AI means for society and what to do about it. Let me start with a couple of super obvious points. I apologize if they're too obvious. Technology is made by people and affects people, so it's not possible to consider technology completely in abstraction from people and their social organizations. The impact of technology on people and their societies can be good, bad, and is most often uncertain and mixed. The slogans that used to be associated with some of the big tech platform companies suggest that they did think about this stuff, although it's interesting to note that they don't say the same slogans anymore. So do you remember move fast and break things? Have you noticed how they stopped saying that? So that suggests what you might think of as one end of the debate or the moral stance regarding the societal and political impact of technology. My things? Other people's things? Is it okay for me to break other people's things? And then way over at the other end you have, don't be evil. They also don't say that so much anymore. I wonder what happened. It's kind of interesting, and it's not just a cheap shot or a joke. It's interesting to reflect on why they think they needed to say that, and then why don't they say it so much anymore? What does that tell you about what's actually going on in these companies and their environments? So AI and the associated enormous advances underway in data, compute power, they're huge. Their reach in terms of impact is vast over space and time and foundational in terms of how they touch social, organization. It's so big and vast that they're sort of diffuse. It's hard to get a handle on even thinking clearly about them. So my 15-year-old said to me when I told him I was running this project on AI, is AI even a thing? That's one respect in which sort of kids' modern language I think is actually a really constructive introduction, because that's like a shorthand way of saying, is this a discrete cognizable entity that is unitary in its character? My 15-year-old didn't say that. Long future reach, deep uncertainty, and so these things, it's hard for all technology to get a good handle on kind of impacts, implications, and what you do about it, but I would submit it's harder for AI and related tech than it is for most of the ones, even big transformative technology that people and institutions have some experience with over the past few years. There's even confusion and disagreement over where the biggest and most important questions are, and thus where you have to focus. So here's a summary of like 20 years of history of thinking about AI and societal impacts. It was all about the singularity, and then people got sort of tired with that. Not everybody got tired with that. It's still kind of important. And then it was all about AI now. So don't think about rise of the machines and domination or maybe them transforming or transcending us. Think about impacts and applications right now and how they're affecting stuff we care about. So that shifted the debate to very immediate real-term concerns like bias, fairness, access, privacy, transparency, safety, explainability when decisions are made about you and whether you have due process or other recourse rights. And now that's sort of where most of the attention is. And I guess I'd like to throw out for you the possibility that there's a big space in between right now and infinity. And that big space might be where the highest stakes disruptions and the sort of most important concerns in terms of reconfiguration of social order, new understandings of what it means to be human, what our relations are with each other and with our social institutions and so on. So, the last few days, we've been in this Summer Institute on this stuff. We have been unbelievably lucky and fortunate. We've got to spend an intensive 3 days thinking about these things with an extraordinary group of 80 people with a degree of diversity in their expertise and their interests and their training that was really extraordinary. So from sort of every piece of tech, science, and engineering through the social sciences, the humanities, the arts, public policy and policy analysis, law, and so on. And the panel today has an impossible job. But most jobs worth doing are impossible, so that's fine. Their impossible job is to distill the highlights of all the insights and experiences that we've had over the past few days into 5-minute opening statements each, and then 40 minutes of discussion, and then a few closing remarks. So the way we've organized that is to give the panel a wildly open-ended question and asking them to comment on it. And the wildly open-ended question is, what should every one of you, and by that we mean every young person with an ambition to be a future technical leader in the space of AI and machine learning, know about societal impacts, law, governance, and ethical implications of AI. However much you think you want to stick to your knitting and just be a technical person, you're going to have to think about these questions. They're going to be front and center throughout your career, and it'll be good if you start thinking about them now, because they're going to come around again and again and again. Now, in addition, on a pragmatic note, thank you, CIFAR. We loved this Summer Institute so much, we want to do it again next year, and the year after, and the year after that. So, we very much hope that happens, and we very much hope some of you get sufficiently energized or aroused about these questions that you're with us next year. And with that, I turn to our fabulous panel. So, here's the format. 4 panelists, 5-minute opening statements on the question, 20 minutes of discussion where I'm going to pose questions to them and moderate among them, more or less. 20 minutes of questions and comments from you coming either live from the audience, which means you stand up and shout, or via the Slack channel, which means It might appear up there. My colleagues are curating for cogency and non-redundancy of the questions that come in over the Slack channel so that we make sure the ones that actually get posed take the debate forward. And then the panelists will each have 2 minutes to wrap up. So I'll introduce all 4 panelists at the start, and then we'll just go right from one to the next. First, immediately to my left, is Rich Sutton, who I think in this group may truly need no introduction. Rich is a professor of computer science here at the University of Alberta and a distinguished research scientist at DeepMind. He is a pioneer of machine learning, and in particular of reinforcement learning, and has a scientific record of such distinction that I urge you not to read his CV lest you just get intimidated. Next to him is Evan Selinger, who's a professor of philosophy at the Rochester Institute of Technology. He's a philosopher by training. He studies a range of issues in technology, expertise, and their societal impacts. And if you're not already aware of it, I commend to you his recent book with Brett Frischman, Re-Engineering Humanity, which is a really wonderful reflection upon how AI and related technologies are already changing people and will continue to do so. Next to Evan is Brenda Leong, who is Senior Counsel and Director of Strategy at the Future of Privacy Forum. Brenda's a lawyer by training. She leads a program and a collaboration and has authored multiple publications on biometrics, privacy, and other ethical issues related to AI and big data, plus programmatic and collaborative work on technical standards and collaborative governance. And then last but not least, at the far end, Dirk Hovey. Dirk is trained as a linguist, but then he switched over to machine learning, and now he's a professor at Bocconi University in Milan, Italy. He studies natural language processing, but also broader issues in computational social science. He's deeply interested in the ethics of AI and big data, and he participates in the interdisciplinary colloquium on healthy conversations on Twitter. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich, our first panelist. Thank you all. Please go ahead. 5-minute opener, Rich. And would you like to stand or, oh, and we put up a poll in advance, and we're going to try and like do a pre and post poll. So what's the question? Over the next 30 years, will the aggregate impact of AI on society be positive, negative, neutral, or don't know? I am not surprised by these strong results.
Positive.
Okay, Rich, off you go.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to start just by echoing some of Ted's comments, and not the comments about how great we all are, but his comments about how important it is to think a bit about society and how we can make it better. I mean, you guys are all beneficiaries of your societies that have educated you and brought you here, and I'm not asking you to be grateful, or I'm not asking you to give back. I just want you to realize that this is an important part of your success, and we want it to be a part of the continuing success of our society. We might have to work. We have to think about how that has come about and how we can keep it coming about. Okay. Yeah, so this is the grand design problem that all of us are involved in. How can we make our world better? And so to deal with that, it's a fascinating problem, really. It's not a technical problem, but it's a fascinating problem, and it's somehow, in some sense, the fundamental problem of mankind. You know, to make a way of working together, collaborating, cooperating, to be so successful. Okay, so what are the essential elements of that? Are diversification, specialization. We are all here. Maybe we are students. Maybe we study math. We're not farmers. The world is very, very specialized, and we should recognize that's how it has come about. Okay, so the questions, though, are what should everybody in AI or machine learning know about societal impacts? And first, societal impacts. The most important thing I think you should know about the societal impacts of AI is that it's going to be primarily on amplifying human intelligence. It's not going to be about creating things that rule over us. It's going to be, people are going to pay money to make themselves smarter. We do it already. We have cell phones that make us remember things better. And we have glasses, and we have pens. Okay, all these are a way of using technology to amplify our abilities. And that, what we see now and what we can expect to see for the foreseeable future, AI will be making us smarter. Second, what is the impact of, most important thing to say about the impact of AI on governance. Well, I'm going to throw a bomb here. I'm going to say that, in my opinion, government is the enemy of society. It's the enemy of civil society, people working together voluntarily. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that in there, that bomb. More along the lines of saying that this is not obviously an unreasonable way to think. There are lots of thoughtful people that do think that way. And I would like you all to bear in mind that alternate perspective as you go about and hearing different ways that AI can impact governance. Okay, and the last point is how it affects ethics, or how we affect this evolution of our society. Today, our ethics are associated around humanism. Humanism meaning, well, I'm not going to try to define humanism right now, but the view of a future with AIs in it, a future with a great diversity of levels of intelligence of the entities that are in it. Some super intelligent, some with primitive intelligence, maybe like self-driving cars, and some like humans. And there will be augmented humans, and there may be pure AI intelligences. So can we have such a society which is prosperous, which is peaceful, which is dynamic, and which is diverse in these ways, and because of that, interesting place to be. Humanism can help us get there, okay? But humanism has two aspects that are severely challenged by this diverse future that I briefly suggested. And that is two tenets of, one, a primary tenet of humanism is that all people are equal. We are all equal. And if we are very diverse, and even more diverse than we are now, we have superintelligence, we have augmented people, we have regular people, maybe we have animals. If we have this great diversity, if there's strength in diversity and diversification, then we can't all be equal in our outcomes, at least. Okay, and secondly, there's the premise that since they're just people and humans are similar enough, we can say we are all deserving of a good life and moral worth. I think these two aspects of humanism are nice, but they're too simplistic, and we're going to be challenged to move beyond them as we envision a very diverse, dynamic society. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rich. I asked the panel to be provocative in their 5 minutes, and I think we're off to a great start. So, Evan.
Hi, everybody. So I just want to tell you that before coming here, I spoke to Skynet, and Skynet predicted the air conditioning was going to break down at the last event, and that I'd be tired and wouldn't want to lose my train of thought, and so I wrote down my opening remarks. Okay, so I wanted to think about one core insight I could give you that would answer the question, what should every person making a career in AI and ML know about social impacts, governance, and the ethical impacts? Okay, here it is. Here's my thing. This is the secret sauce. I think if you're going to be working in the fields of AI and machine learning, chances are you're going to be doing more than just building products and services, even though that's what the job descriptions are going to say. You're going to be participating in a far more powerful process. It's a process of world building. And above all, that's what I want you to know. Either you are a world builder if you're doing that now, or if this is the career you're going into, you will be a world builder. And that's because artificial intelligence and machine learning is already deeply embedded in infrastructure, and it impacts important decisions everywhere. It's changing how markets run, how medicine is practiced, how military operations are conducted, how social relations are experienced, how transportation works, how cities become smarter or dumber, and how just the enterprise of criminal justice truly is. Now, over time, I think all this influence is poised to increase. Your world building literally will change reality. How, for better or worse, people are going to live, work, and play, and what opportunities or lack thereof are going to be available to future generations. And so to orient yourself for thinking critically and carefully about social impacts, governance, and ethics, you need to ask yourself one important question above all. What kind of world do you want to build? So here's the good news. So I've been teaching tech ethics at a technical university for 16 years. When I first started, I would challenge science and engineering students to think really critically about this question. Now in my classes, it was amazing. They did. We had great conversations, they were passionate, and they were vigorous. But then when they graduated and went into the real world, I think many felt that these concerns had to be checked at the door. They were academic. They were things you do in a humanities class, but when you go to work, you toe the corporate line, and that's about it. So as professionals, they would tell me civics meant voting for politicians, but not politicizing tech work. I think things are changing, and you're fortunate, like really fortunate, to be living in this moment in time, because I think a moral awakening is occurring, and I think it's becoming infectious. Tech workers in major Silicon Valley companies, they're participating in, if not forcing, important conversations about what technology should and shouldn't be used for, including in some cases what technology shouldn't even be developed. They're insisting their voices are heard because at the end of the day, they don't want to be complicit in building degraded worlds. And this means they don't think it's okay to pass the buck by insisting that governance is someone else's problem. So I want to end my opening remarks with a story. We all love stories. Okay. So Elon Musk once posed a very fruity version of the AI control problem. And in his version, he invited us to imagine human beings tasking an AI to pick strawberries. You can see where this is going. Over time, the software redesigns itself to meet the core objective with maximum efficiency. Eventually, it blankets every nook and cranny of the planet with strawberry fields, and it annihilates civilization in the process. Now, Musk was worried about human bodies piling up because he thought a bot's values could be misaligned with our own and that it wouldn't grasp the full impact of its behavior. But there's another way to look at this. The brilliant science fiction author Ted Chiang, and by the way, if you haven't read Ted Chiang, you should read Ted Chiang. That's my other big advice for today. He sees things very differently. So he saw this story as a tale of mechanical massacre that's actually riddled with the subtext of the immorality of unrestrained human ambition. So here's what Chiang has to say. He says, consider, who pursues their goals with monomaniacal focus, oblivious to the possibility of negative consequences? Who adopts a scorched earth approach to increasing market share? This hypothetical strawberry-picking AI does what every tech startup wishes it could do: grow at an exponential rate and destroy its competitors until it achieves absolute monopoly. And so, as you're thinking about world building, I hope you consider the values of the companies and institutions that you're working for and whether they're aligned with the worlds that you'll be proud of shaping. If they're not, this is the key task ahead of you. Shape the institutions that design the technologies that are going to rebuild the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Now, Brenda.
Wow. After both of those, I'm a little intimidated to go back and work in AI anymore. So, yeah, great moment in time. AI is going to be in every part of our lives. You're going to be the ones doing it, so all the responsibility is on your shoulders. And with that, I'm just kidding. I do think it's really important to understand the influence that you have. And one of the points that Ted made, and I think has been at least implicitly echoed here, is that there is no sort of put your head down and do the work oblivious to where it interacts with other things and how it affects other decisions. One of the things that I deal with a lot in policy work is this idea that tech is neutral or can be neutral, that it's just a tool and it's who uses it and how they use it that gives it good or bad impact or spin. And that is entirely false. And if I could convince you of nothing else today, I would like that to be the one thing, that every design decision and every programming choice you make has implications greater or smaller in some way. Ted mentioned the last couple of days that we've spent with a variety of people from a variety of different academic specialties and backgrounds talking about the role of machine learning and the implications of AI in society. And the particular group that I was in, we spent 2 days literally trying to quantify a measure of the ethical status of a machine learning program that could be generalized, scored, and put into a metric that would actually be published by IEEE, one of the international standard setting bodies, for companies that want to, or eventually might be regulated to, create an ethical review or analysis of the products they're selling or designing. That's a really hard thing to do, and I'm not going to sit here and say that we mastered that in 2 days. We had some really interesting conversations, though, and began to sort of structure how that might look and what that might, how that might be used. And that's a real thing that's going to, at some point, have to happen in some way or another. And those are the standards that a company is going to impose on you as a programmer or a designer or a data scientist or whatever other aspect of these technologies you're going to engage with, to say, hey, not only does it have to work, but at the end of the day, it has to be ethical. We're already having that conversation right now in the US especially about facial recognition technology. There are two primary criticisms of it. One is that it doesn't work well. It's inaccurate on non-middle-aged white men. And the second is that there are concerns about individual liberties and freedoms and autonomy. So the first critique is a technical one. We could solve it. We can get better data. We can get better training data sets. We can do a better job, and we can make it so that it works. So let's assume for a minute that as programmers, that's the technical answer. You say, well, I can fix that. It'll take some time and some work and some effort, but we can fix that. And you make it perfect. And now we have perfect facial recognition technology. There's still the ethical question of how do we use it? Can stores and companies use it? Can governments use it? Can it be used for security in large public spaces where there's threats of terrorism? Can it be used to find abducted children or victims of sex trafficking? Can it be used to identify people at public protests or exercising other rights of assembly and free speech and press, to track or target journalists in different parts of the world? Those questions all have different non-overlapping answers that are guided by the implementation policies behind the technology, which is based on how it's built to be used and implemented. And those are some of the challenges that you will face with new technologies or new aspects of machine learning technologies that we haven't even thought of yet. So that's my framing for today, is that you, no matter where you are in that sort of infrastructure of design and computing and marketing and policy setting and regulation of these technologies, is that you have a piece to play in how that impacts you, your society, and your fellow men.
All right, I like standing up. I think that was a good thing. It's also better for my nervousness. All right, so before I start launching into all the things I wanted to tell you, I wanted to poll you. Who here has learned a second language?
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
That's great. I think that's also one of the big requirements in order to become a good programmer. Programming is like a language. You can disagree. So Ted likes to ask easy questions like, what are the things you need to know in order to be in this world and like work in machine learning and in deep learning? Okay, good. So the one thing I would like to say is, don't think that machine learning and deep learning is a separate discipline. Don't think it's tech anymore. It's in everything. I'm trained as a linguist, then I decided I want to do natural language processing. Switched into a computer science program. That was a rough start. Now I sit in a social science university. So it's very hard to predict where things are going to take you, but using machine learning in all of these different environments has actually been a great boon. And to go back to some of the things that have been said earlier, tech is used in all of these different aspects of life. And, you know, believe it or not, there are a lot of other fields out there that have thought for, you know, dozens, hundreds, thousands of years about various aspects of life without machine learning. You probably all know the XKCD comic about now we've used algorithms, so now we actually know it's hard. And before that, we didn't know. And this is one of the traps that it's easy to fall into, and I've done it. I thought, oh, you know, like having machine learning, having all these quantitative tools, that's so much better. And, you know, we just need to take things, quantify them, and then that's going to be easier. Then you get to talk to other people, and you find out, oh, wait, there are all these things that I have completely not thought about. And they are actually not far out things. There are things that are very much in my wheelhouse as a natural language processing specialist. So a while ago, I sat down and actually wrote up a couple of cases where I thought, oh, this could be ethically critical, this could be difficult, some things that existed, some papers I'd seen, and some cases that I could think about. And then I got stuck, and I left that paper somewhere. Then I was introduced to the partner of a friend of mine who is a philosopher. And more than that, she's a philosopher of ethics. And more than that, she works on ethics of new technology. So I gave her the paper, and I said, I just wrote down these things. What do you think about this? And she looked at it, and she said, oh, this is an example for exclusion, and this is an example for dual use, and this is an example for overexposure. And just by saying that, suddenly I realized, oh, now I can think of more examples of these things. So collaborating with somebody from a different field gave me the insight I needed to actually complete my work, think about it differently, and then we made it into a paper and published it. And one of the things she introduced me, and this is something that has come up just now, is dual use. Everything we do can and will be used for things that we haven't intended it for. The poster child example is the atom bomb. That's not what they had in mind when they started splitting atoms, but that's what it was used for, right? Now, a lot of the things we're doing are not that dangerous or not immediately dangerous, but they can be used for things we haven't intended. And facial recognition, but also author attribute prediction and other tasks are examples of that. And you are probably the first generation of practitioners in machine learning that cannot live under this assumption of innocence. You are starting out now in a world where machine learning is knowingly used for bad purposes. A couple of years ago, we could still tell ourselves, oh, you know, I'm just running this on the New York Times, like it's not really affecting anybody, this is just pure science. Now it actually has an impact. It really affects people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And this is something that, you know, we should be aware of. You don't have to think about that every second, but we need to stop thinking that this is sort of a separate entity that is away from the everyday life. So when I asked about second languages, that's because, well, I'm a linguist at heart and an NLP person by training. And language is one of these cases where you quickly reach the limits. So if you've learned a language, you know that it's easy to learn 80% of a language because it's regular. And then there's 20%, and that's like go, went, gone. Like, why is it not go, go, goed? And like, why do I have to put a do in a question in English? Like, that do doesn't do anything. So we can throw, you know, amazing systems at a lot of text today, but they aren't capable of learning these exceptions because language is, well, it's weird. Weird and wonderful. It's not a natural system, it's a cognitive system, and it's a societal system. Sometimes people decide that, oh, it's cool to say this, or no, we don't say that anymore. And there's no rhyme or reason to it, right? So if you work with language, these things matter. And more than that, it matters that language is used by people. People use it to express themselves, to say who they are, what they are, whether they want to or not, it comes through. You get a sense of, you know, where somebody's from, how old they are, what their gender is, what their education is. And if you work with language, and this is my personal pitch, you need to be aware of these things. Because if you're not, and if you're not talking to people who know a little bit about languages every now and then, you might actually end up building systems that are dual use and that can be used for something that you might not have been aware of.
Thank you, Dirk. So thanks to all the panelists for your fabulously insightful and provocative remarks, and for keeping within your time limits. You are stars. You are rock stars. So I was jotting down questions that occurred to me as each of you spoke, and I have a few. So I'm going to sort of ask you some questions and see what discussion we can get going, and we'll do that for a while, and then we'll go to questions and comments from you all. And I should say these questions, they mostly were provoked by things that one of you said, but I think they're things that more than you is likely to be interested in. So I will identify, a relationship, but I urge you to sort of react and so on. So Rich, you went first. You were the most provocative. With fear and trembling, I ask you, suppose it's reasonably likely that one of the aggregate societal impacts of further advances in AI is to greatly empower the state, including tyrannical states. Does that make you worry about your life's work and the future prospects of the technologies that you love so much and have so much hope for? Or are you certain that that will not come to pass?
I'm not certain what will happen. It's interesting. How do we make decisions about what should happen, even what we want to happen? Maybe the kind of society there should be is the kind of society that works. Maybe there shouldn't be individual freedom. Maybe we should be like the bees. The bees have a lovely society, but it's all kind of controlled.
They never complain.
So I think if it's true that the best way to organize people is by a dictatorial state, then maybe that should happen.
How would we tell?
But at the same time, I don't think it is the best way to organize people. I think we want to take advantage of the independent thought of all the different people, and that's a great source of power, and that tends to be lost. And we've seen highly centralized states have ended up not doing as well as ones that are more diverse and so forth. But if AI would AI do that? I mean, what is AI? AI is the arrival of things that are more smart things. And I really urge you to think not that there's just one that's going to take over. It's going to be lots of them. There will be a society of AI agents if they come to be. And they will not be one who can just plant strawberries and take over the universe, because there's going to be all the other AIs, and they will compete with each other. And the one who's fixated on a goal of having strawberries and not having people to buy the strawberries or pay for the strawberries, that agent will not be the most successful agent. They will have to be subject to the same forces that everybody is.
Thank you.
That's a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. AI and liberty. Anybody else want to take it on?
It's a good question.
It is a good question.
I don't think I'm exactly comforted by the idea that I don't have to worry about just one AI, but many of them. AI and freedom. I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself here by backing away from the technology for a minute and saying that I don't think that AI is going to be the make or break of whether we do things well or don't do things well, or succeed or don't succeed, which is not the same thing as saying it's neutral, just being clear. Humans have a pretty mixed record of success already as a social organism, creating society, and I think in many ways AI is going to enable us to exacerbate both some of the strengths and weaknesses of our innate nature, and that is why it is up to people, individuals like you, to thoughtfully consider how that technology is being implemented in ways that have the potential to do that, to impact our freedoms directly, in unexpected ways, in group or global ways, as well as with individual impacts. And if we are not thoughtful about that process, then we run the risk of having some of the same problems that we are already facing in our societies and communities being worse or faster or more efficient, which may not be a good thing, as those technologies are implemented.
So I just want to say one quick thing on this. And this is something that, Okay, so if I had one other big thought to leave you with today, it would be this. I think, unfortunately, if we don't talk about AI, but we talk about AI products and services, so we talk about things that are used by people and institutions, they're going to have, on the negative side, disparate impacts on, marginal and vulnerable populations more than others. Like, that's not a surprise. But what that means is, if the scale and scope and power of the uses of these products and services ends up creating harms at a very fast pace that aren't equally distributed. So some people benefit immensely while other people are hurting. This is going to strain democracy in a really important way. Because if democracy ends up being moved by the majority thinking about the best interests of the majority, as opposed to what are the best interests of a democracy, which are certain rights for all people, we're really in trouble. So for me, I would argue, the biggest concern when you're thinking about liberty is not your own liberty per se, but think about the liberty of those who are worst off and what role AI products and services are going to have. And when thinking about policies, what would it mean to think about setting up policies from the point of view that first and foremost asks, what are those impacts going to be like? And should I be benefiting if I'm not amongst those groups if it means they're going to have to suffer?
So a couple of years ago, there was a paper that was submitted to an NLP conference where the authors claimed, in this country that I don't want to point out, there's a lot of people that are discussing things that the government does not approve of. And in order not to be caught, they're using these ciphers. So they're saying things that, when you just read them word by word, don't mean the thing that is actually intended. And that way they get around censorship. And we have developed this algorithm to actually undo this. So we can read the text and we can tell you what they actually meant. And so I read this and I thought, I was a reviewer and I thought, this is not great. Who benefits from this? Like, now these people have to come up with new ciphers if they want to talk about the things they want to talk about. Luckily, the paper was not very good, so I had no problem rejecting it, but it asked a difficult question. And then it actually was my rejection was overruled by the area chair, who said, no, this paper should be published. And I talked to him later and said, why should this paper be published? Like, I don't see any benefit in having this. And he said, well, yes and no. If it's implemented, then this state can, unscramble what people are saying and censor them. But the technology is out there. These people are going to, sell that to the state whether we publish it or not. So it's better that we publish it in a peer-reviewed journal and put it in a context and people are actually aware of it. So these tools can be used to suppress freedom and liberty, but I think at the same time, we live now in an age where anybody with an internet connection and a reasonably sized computer can actually download data and train a deep learning system that's very, very powerful to do amazing things. So it would be very easy, if you are aware that this problem exists, to come up with a rescrambling algorithm, right? A way to sort of, encode again what people have done. People have worked on, putting stickers on pictures to make it look like there's a melon in this picture or a camel, even though there isn't, it's a school bus or a bike. So the same technology that can sort of constrain our freedom can actually give each and every one of us a lot of power to strain for our freedom, to actually develop things that, make us more connected, make us more free, make us more empowered.
Fabulous, thank you so much. So my first question was like global and vast, and my next one goes right down to the individual level, but it's even harder. And it was initially inspired, Evan, by your remark about your students. They're so concerned about the broader implications and ethics in their school, and then they go get their jobs, and they have their deadlines, and they have their bosses, and and they hunker down, and play their roles and observe their constraints. I gotta say, it's going to take me a minute to get to the point in this one because I have a little story on the way. I gotta say, I heard this question from all 4 of you, and I see it in at least 3 of the questions from you folks that are already up there. So, I was talking to a student group at UCLA on AI and ethics, newly formed. And there was a young man there who'd come in and he asked a question. He said, you know, I work as a machine learning engineer in a small startup firm, and we do credit scoring algorithms. And I'm really the one who does the work. And I have to decide, you know, how to train these and what data, what variables to consider in the algorithms to do credit risk. And I know I can't consider race. This is in Los Angeles, California, just for social context. But I also know that there's all kinds of things that I can put in that basically have the effect of being proxies for race, and thus making or replicating existing racial biases. And I don't know how to think about that. Can you tell me, Professor? He said, how should I think about the ethical obligations when I do that? And I, in a panic, said, wow, I think that's above your job. I'm falling into the same trap for your students. I think that's above your job description. That's your firm's decision. And he said, no, my CEO's too busy. I have this huge task. I'm the one who does it, and I have to make the decisions. And you know, it works better when you use this stuff. So here he is, this kid, he's worried about this stuff. He's in a role where he's like got to perform for his bosses. His firm's a little startup in a shark-filled competitive environment. There's sort of structure and constraint all the way up. So how can we help individuals, these people, now or in 3 years, when they're working in this field in their firms, think in a useful, effective way about what ethical principles or criteria ought to constrain or influence their behavior, and how do they reconcile that with sort of the world of structure and role that they sit in and all of its constraints? That's it.
Wow. I'll just address one little small slice of this, right? I mean, I wish I could give you some sort of like simple algorithm, right? You just do X. But what I think is interesting...
And do you see how I've like tied you in knots because I've not let you say that's above my pay grade, right?
I think the one important thing that's emerged really is a sense of worker class consciousness, right? If we think about this on an individual level, if I think Ted is asking me, what would I tell an individual who had a particular problem? I'd have to sit down with that person and have a deep conversation about the problem at hand. But if you're asking me to speak more generally, I think an important thing to recognize is you are not alone. And that means you're going to have other people to think this through. And hopefully other people that care, that want to think it through with you, and other people who could collectively, like, push back against management. So in your instance, it happens to be a small business, and maybe you end up working in a small startup, and you won't have the luxury of doing that, but many of you will be at larger organizations. So I guess at least what I want to suggest as a kind of heuristic is don't think you need to do it alone, and there is power in numbers, and there is power in sort of recognizing that collectively, you're not just a replaceable widget, or not necessarily so, at least when more people believe that standing together you don't have to be.
Any other panelists want to comment on that? Rich? No, thanks. Rich, thank you.
I think you have to take responsibility. I don't think you can, it's your duty to make your guess at what you think is right and implement it to some extent. You have to take responsibility for what happens. The individuals taking the responsibility is maybe the best thing for our societies. It's what makes them work. But at the same time, you've got to pick your battles, and you don't have to damage yourself. I mean, you have to, if you can only do the right thing at great cost, then you can't do the right thing. You have to balance that. But don't try to avoid it, and don't try to avoid making the decision. But you can't change the world all by one person.
That's a great answer. Be willing to be morally uncomfortable. Yeah. So experience discomfort and even act contrary to what you think you ought to, rather than pretend the problem's not there. Dirk?
Yeah, so just a second what Rich just said, and also Evan, there's no easy solution, there's no checklist. We organized several workshops on ethics in AI, and before the first one, people came in, they said, oh, are you just gonna publish like a list? And I just have to go through and say like, yes, did that, okay, this is ethical and this is not. And you know, people posted at us on Twitter and they're like, oh, you're just doing this because you wanted to tell people what to do and boss them around. And the thing is that ethical behavior, I think, is not about following a particular set of rules, because life's pretty complicated. And you know, you're not always in the same situation where this would apply. So the best I could come up with for now was that ethical behavior means to ask questions and ask uncomfortable questions of yourself and of others. And you know, it really depends on the circumstance what the way out is. I'm a part of it's called the Professional Conduct Committee of the Association for Computational Linguistics, but it's sort of like an ethics panel. And you know, I signed up thinking, oh, there's going to be all these clear-cut cases, and then you just have to say, okay, you should do this. This is the right thing. And like all the cases I've been involved with were super complicated, and I have no idea whether we made the right decision and whether we, you know, were able to find the correct solution or whether there was one. So oftentimes, just asking the question and, you know, raising the issue and being uncomfortable and making people uncomfortable is probably the best thing we can do to start with.
So Evan, yes or no? Not now, okay. Evan raised Ted Chiang's stories. So let me amplify 100-fold what he said. You must read the fiction of Ted Chiang, which in my opinion is the deepest, most serious reflection really in any medium at present upon kind of ethical challenges and implications associated with AI and with the sort of possibility of autonomous intelligences and diversity of capabilities, kind of in the way that Rich was characterizing. But I want to pick up the point. So one of Ted Chiang's moral lessons that you quoted is kind of step back from rapacious, insatiable, single-minded, single-valued ambition. Now, that sounds wonderful, and I think it sounds like guidance that is both sort of positively reasonable and normatively reasonable in the way we think about our obligations in our lives. But not only is an awful lot of sort of computational technology premised upon existing value functions that are single-valued and go all the way up, but for 150 years we've constructed societal institutions that sort of are proxies for that. I mean, corporations maximizing profits subject to various constraints can be understood as things that are founded on humanity but sort of abstract from human variability and diversity of interests in kind of pursuit of more single-minded goals. So somebody help me think through where are the practical steps toward a world in which both technologies and human organizations are restrained, moderate, sensitive to context, you know, and otherwise kind of free of kind of crazy pursuit of, you know, the paperclip or the strawberry coring extremity, which are, it's like, it's a cartoon, it's an extremist cartoon, but it's not that wildly at odds with things that we actually have operating in the world. Restraint, where do we get it from?
The organization I work for is called the Future of Privacy Forum. And so the first question a lot of people ask me anytime I go anywhere is there a future for privacy, or is there any privacy in the future? And for those who despair, or with whom I have that conversation, who seem to think that that moment has passed to have privacy moving forward, I like to draw an analogy to the early 20th century and the Industrial Revolution, and the shift from an agricultural economy to an industrialized and urban economy, and how badly that went for quite some time, and you know, maybe arguably still is, but at least initially, you know, we had very unsafe working conditions, we had no quality control for products, we had no standardization, we had children working, you know, in factories, we had people in mines that were not safe. We had pollution output from factories pouring into the rivers and the air and things like that. And there was very definitely a point in time where I am sure people looked around and thought, there's no way back from this. This is where we are. The companies are making money. They're not going to stop. They're not going to willingly restrain themselves. And we're doomed. And we did pull back from that. We had social movements. We had, the organization of unions. We had people expanding the rights of workers and protections for children and quality standards for products and food and processing and transportation and electricity and all those kinds of things. And it wasn't pretty or smooth or easy, but it happened, and we ended up with a much more regulated, managed society that pulled back from some of the worst of those problems. And I think that we are demonstrating that same transition now, in the sense of we built the internet, this crazy thing called the internet, without really planning to or having a whole lot of intent about how it was going to work or where it was going to go. And we ended up with this model of free usage in exchange for advertising and data collection. And now we're seeing some of the concerns and harms that are now becoming more evident, deeper impacting, longer lasting, more societally dangerous as we become more integrated and reliant on technology. And so we are now seeing people start to push back and try to figure out what type of regulation, what type of safety, what type of restrictions do we need to have in place for companies, for individuals, for governments, to make that more sustainable over the long run. And I hope and believe that we can do that.
So I'll come at this from a design end, because you guys, everybody's going to be designing something here, right? Like, these are the jobs that you're going to have. What is one of the key drivers with AI? It's automation. And what's one of the key goals of automation? To make things more efficient, to get rid of friction, right? That's like the playbook of Silicon Valley disruption. Here's something to think about in terms of restraint. There are so many reasons why doing something efficiently is better than doing it inefficiently. But there's also a fetish that comes from not thinking through the downsides of contexts where going too far with efficiency is the wrong way to go. And thinking about this in terms of an individual level probably isn't going to help very much. We need better designed products that introduce some noise into systems and that maybe choose not to make something more efficient when it could be. So let me give you a simple example, just to sort of provide a tool for our imaginations. How many people here use, whether you're texting or you're doing this with email, how many people use some form of predictive text out here, right? I mean, right, Gmail has it on our phones now, just finished swiping. It's great, right? Because so much of our, texting and so much of our email these days, because we're overloaded, is so formulaic and we've got too much to respond to. We are happy to be sort of coached by an algorithm to tell us what it is that we want to say, because we weren't going to be thinking that much about how to finish our sentence anyway. And it's not, but how many people have ever, at this point, when it's still kind of primitive, have started typing in a sentence and had a suggestion and had a feeling like, wow, this is kind of creepy? Raise your hand. Yeah, well, it's going to get better and better, and it's going to get more personalized. So here's one potential, if I were to put my dystopian cap on, right? Like, here's one potential outcome. We normally think of cliches as sort of standard turns of phrase that we all use when we want to be quick and lazy, but they're the same phrases that we all use. Well, what if machine learning gets good enough to finish our sentences so that we become personal cliches? That going from the vast big databases of our own correspondence, it turns out that we are predictable and we become programmable, because it's so much more efficient to just let the machine finish your thoughts for you. Of course, if you look at it, we've got a linguist here, right? If you look at like the history of humanity, like expression in language, this is amongst the hallmarks, of one of the things our species can do. Here's my point. Am I going to stop using autocomplete because I'm scared of this sort of dystopian nightmare? I am not. Because I'm in a time crunch like all of you are. But if I were designing systems, then you may face a design parameter where you might ask yourself, do I want to actually do I want to gum up the works a little bit? Do I want to introduce, because of how this will be used? And hopefully, if through value-sensitive design, an appreciation of not always eliminating friction can catch on a little bit more, I can't tell you what those products and services are, but there will be markets for them.
Thanks. Wow, I'm just struck by the continuity and sort of integration of a lot of this discussion. In fact, you've perfectly led me to the last question I wanted to pose to the panel before I turn it over to this. And I got to say, I am daunted by the number and quality of the questions that have already come up and my utter inability to, turn the panel's attention to more than a tiny fraction of them. Okay, maybe this is a stupid question, and a possible answer to it is, Ted, that's a stupid question. Okay. As technical performance in AI-related applications gets better, do the distribution of societal impacts and ethical challenges associated with them get worse or better, more difficult or less difficult, or is it too complicated and individual across specific cases to tell? I'm just thinking about facial recognition, and the risk of sort of basically tyrants being able to suppress dissent, but I'm also thinking about the individualization of cliche. So,
I guess my quick and dirty answer is to take this away from AI per se and look at the systems that AI is embedded in. Obviously, it depends what time we're looking at things, but if you look at things right now, inequality, particularly in capitalist systems, and I'm not making an anti-capitalist point, I'm making an observation. The gaps between the tops and the bottoms are significant. And if you look at the concentrations of power, I think it would be more than just well-wishing. It would be a bit naive to think that without significant transformations, the uses of these technologies are going to rise all boats. I think one of the greatest dangers without significant political will is they'll be concentrated in the hands of the few and continue to widen that. And if we think that, prejudice hasn't gone away and other forms of sort of tyranny, the idea that somehow these things will become de-biased as opposed to reinforced or reinforced in new clever ways, I really do think that's well-wishing. So I'm not predicting that this will happen, but I'm saying unless this is first and foremost a real serious concern that we have, it's going to be a tremendous problem. Another way of putting this is, if you were to ask me, is dystopia or utopia down the road, I'd be the wrong person to ask. Because if you were to talk to some people right now, they would say, dystopia is here. Depends who you're asking.
A little later on, we're going to actually go back to the poll, which touches precisely on this question. I've been really struck by the dynamics of the poll and the distribution of answers over time. That's all for my questions. Now I'm going to turn to questions raised by you, and I think I'm going to do it one off the board, one from live in the audience. I actually don't need this because they have me mic'd up, so you just hang on to that. So I'll take one off the board, one from live in the audience, and they tell me, although I'm a little dubious, that the acoustics are such that anybody who speaks loudly can be heard everywhere in the hall. So when I turn to you in the hall, if you want to pose a question, stand up and I'll point to you and then shout it out. First, I'm going to go to your questions on the board, and I'm going to pick the one I've seen that is most dissimilar to anything that we've thus far discussed, and it's the one about how to deal with large-scale livelihood displacement. What is the most sensible form of response? All the debate now is focused on some combination of sort of minimum wage and universal basic income. That seems deficient. How should we think about the appropriate social response to that, and how do we get there?
I'm sorry, Ted, can you restate the beginning of that? I didn't catch it.
Job displacement. So large-scale displacement of livelihood. So, first they came for the stockbrokers and the truckers, and then they're coming for the pharmacists and the lawyers. God, no, not the lawyers. We'll hang on. Okay, so the classes of people who've all lost their jobs this month are all the truck drivers and all the lawyers, and they're all lined up at the, I guess in Rich's world it's the cooperative window, and in my world it's the government window, and we have to do what do we do for them? What response makes sense, and what is a plausible direction of movement toward that?
Get the linguist to fix it.
At the end of my list, I have the easy questions.
So, it's an interesting question about, you know, like what's going to happen with like jobs being taken away, and obviously, you know, that is very disconcerting. Interestingly, so in the individual case or in the beginning, that's a very bad thing. If we follow this to its logical conclusion and we're all out of a job, that would be a great thing. So imagine you live in a world where computers and machines are taking care of everything for us, and we all just have time to paint and, you know, compose songs, have meaningful interactions with people, make our own bread, or I don't know. That would be fantastic, and like the classical ideal has been to not work, right? And today, the people who are very wealthy do not work in any discernible way.
In Italy.
So, so going to the logical extreme would be great. Obviously, the transition period is going to be, pardon my French, shitty. Right? Like nobody wants to be out of a job, and going back to what Brenda said earlier, you know, we can change our societal norms and ideas. We went from, you know, children above the age of 10 can work, you know, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, to like, maybe you shouldn't work, you know, more than 8 hours a day, and maybe we should take at least one day of the weekend off. And, you know, maybe that's just a basic human right, and, you know, maybe torture is not okay, and like universal health care is, well, that seems obvious now, but it wasn't, you know, 100, 200 years ago, in some cases 50 years ago. Yeah, and so things are going back and forth. You know, if I had a great idea how to solve this problem quickly, then I don't know, but I think exploring more the opportunity of giving us more time to be human and offloading some of the meaningless tasks to machines would not be a bad thing. How we're going to do that, that's a different question. Rich, you have an idea about that?
I'm not going to offer a solution, but I'd like to offer a prediction, which is that there will be a clamoring from the people for the government to do something about it, and the government will do something about it, and then it will become kind of politicized, and in the end, what they will have done will be seen as very ineffective, very poorly, often, or in fact, contrary to its stated aims. Instead of helping people move from one place to another, there'll probably be people not changing their jobs, and so that's my prediction, that they'll be clamoring for it, and it'll be very bad, a solution formed by government. And so I just really suggest that maybe you don't want to be one of the ones that clamoring for the government to solve this problem for you. You should solve it for yourself.
Just to say one thing, if I can.
Of
And
course.
Ted, I'm doing this for you. I'm going to make a climate change analogy.
Oh.
Here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is you're all going to be okay. I think so. I mean, I really think you're going to be okay. Here's the bad news. So if my daughter were to ask me, like, Dad, what do I think would be like a good field for me to get into? Yeah, like, sure, you know, AI, machine learning, go for it, right? Like, good field. Here's the thing, like, software has eaten the world. AI and machine learning has eaten software. And at some point, there will be far less human programmers needed, right? Like, this is not an exempt field. Like, you've got home field advantage right now, and it's very positional and very temporary. The problem is, just like politicians who tend to think about, like, how can we create policies that will be okay while we're in office and then kick the can down the road? Administrators are no different, right? I have yet to, I mean, whatever, I live in a small world, but I have yet to hear a real administrator take seriously, like, what happens when we stop hyping that programming and coding is the way of the future because there will be less programmers and coders? And they're not asking that because just like you're going to be okay, they're going to be retired by then. But what we need in thinking about the unemployment issue is we need to create incentive structures for people who are making really important curricular decisions and political decisions to find better ways to think beyond effectively the impacts of their tenure. Because if we continue so myopically, again, we'll be okay. But it would be irresponsible predictably knowing that not too far beyond that, I don't think once, in your scenario, Rich, like, we ask the government for things and it doesn't go, like, the revolution doesn't end well. So a little bit of foresight on that.
Okay. Now, a bit of a process experiment because we're running low on time. So I do want to give the opportunity for live, like real-time questions from the audience. So if you want to ask a question, stand up. I'm going to collect 3, and then I'm going to go to the panel and invite them to pick and choose what they respond to, and then we'll go over the panel one more time for very brief closing observations. So if you want to ask a real-time, face-to-face question, 1, sir, stand and speak loud.
We saw your example before about how your ethical views on a particular topic affected your review of the paper. My question is, should papers in AI include an ethical component alongside the technical one? And if so, given that the set of reviewers is usually very small, why should the views of these very selected set of people that were chosen because of their technical abilities sway the development of science? Because of their
Fabulous. Ethical peer review, 1. Sir.
So
Stand up, speak loud.
I want to kind of continue on what
Okay.
you said. Yeah, so the thing is, if I'm working on machine learning research, I kind of try to not think about the task and solve the bigger problem or the more general problem. And this kind of makes it hard for me to do this job and also think about the effects. And I think although there are people working on ethics and fairness and these kind of topics, when I'm working on some fundamental machine learning problems, what reviewers require from me is more image-net results than, for example, bias or fairness results. Because we don't have databases that are designed and are standard evaluations for machine learning algorithms that are required by the reviewers from the community to evaluate an algorithm with respect to fairness or ethics or bias.
So I'm going to take that partly as a repetition of the question about ethical peer review, and then an additional closely rated question about how do you think about multiple orthogonal things at once as you do your work.
Yeah, so the thing is do you think it's possible if we enforce this in the community to follow on this?
Okay.
If the research goes to that direction, maybe the rest of the people that are using these algorithms follow as well.
Thank you. One more? Ma'am.
So, going back to the idea that we are all jobless and we reach this point that,
Not yet.
well, let's suppose, as humans, what would be our new purpose in life? Because right now our purpose is like we work and we want to get a better life, but now we already have it, so.
Fabulous and compactly expressed. So ethical peer review, doing multiple things at once, and once we don't have jobs, what the purpose of life?
I'm going to leave door number 3 for my philosopher friend next to me here. I'm going to focus on the gentleman right there who asked about the, when you're focused on the task at hand, how are you also incorporating these other things? And just reiterate what I said before, which is every decision you're making in that process carries some kind of implication. Fairness and bias are not binary or discrete things that you can set or choose or even preemptively evaluate. So whether you're choosing to design your system to have equal treatment versus equal impact, your feature selection, your weighting process as you go through your code, all of those choices are based on whatever the design specifications are for what you're trying to achieve out of the data you're analyzing or you're using. And each one of those has some sort of implication, just like Ted's example of, I know I'm not supposed to collect a field for race, but I know that if I collect a field for zip code, it's going to inadvertently be used as a proxy because we've seen machine learning systems do that routinely over time. So how many fields do I need to leave out? How does that degrade my accuracy? What kind of trade-off am I willing to live with? How do I evaluate my results against different versions of this to try to determine the best accuracy with the least bias in that particular measure? These are just innate in all of the decisions that you make. And while there are levels of ethical review, so the company itself or some higher level review board might decide that the product as a whole has ethically defensible uses or ethically concerning uses that might impact limits they put on it. But what you set as your defaults in the settings impact the effect on users. And so all those things are decisions that you as the coder is actually making and putting in, but have these things. So there, you have to find ways to think about them either through the policy design in your company, through the values that you bring to it, as I think it was Evan said, the discussion within your community of how to face those, or ethical standards like the ones I was talking about that we might be seeking to, we, society collectively, not me personally, create to sort of reach consensus on how to identify and measure those ethics.
And because we're almost out of time, I'm going to ask each of you to bundle your response to these questions with any single closing point that you'd like to make. And because I've done a bait and switch on you, you alone get to come back later if you want, okay?
Okay, good. I'll be brief. So about the ethics question, this is a great question, and it's been vigorously debated in the NLP community. In the 90s, there was something called the statistical revolution in NLP. Up till then, people wrote relatively simple programs with symbolic AI and based on linguistic theories. And suddenly there were all these papers that used statistical models, and they did a lot better. But people said like, oh, this is just sports analogies. This system beat that system. I'm not a sports moderator. Like, why should I know about how EM works, right? Well, 20 years, 30 years on, we just take that for granted. It's just, if you're doing NLP, you know about statistical models, right? So I think, yes, it's reasonable to assume that people should start thinking about ethics as part of their job if they're a reviewer. I also think it's not, as Brenda said, it's not a yes-no question. It's not a, is this ethical or not? It's a, oh, hey, here's a question I had while I read your paper. Did you think about that? And 6 eyes see more than 2, so just having a couple of other people look at it is probably, just a good idea. It's not a tribunal. It's not, that shouldn't be the thing to do it. But talking about it, being aware of it, is a good idea. I hope that also goes a little bit towards your question. And then about the meaning of life, 42 would be too easy an answer. So
10 seconds on the meaning of life.
Okay, so
Work and love.
What our lives are about has changed over the course of history. Work is now, obviously the thing we define ourselves by, and things we're proud of, and also why not. There's one thing that makes humans unique, and that is creativity. We're very good at coming up with new senses, with new meanings of life. Left to our own devices, we will find something, and I think that's something to focus on. That's something we can already focus on now while we're doing work, but I think that can, fill a void to some extent.
Brenda, your one closing thought. Oh, you want to come back at the end. Okay, Evan, your one closing thought.
Okay, so my quick integration of both things here. So I think in terms of, should we require scientists to publish ethical things? No. I think specialization just doesn't work that way. That said, I think there is an answer, which is it's about the sources of funding for scientific projects that need to think about the projects in a more ethical way. So in the US, the National Science Foundation, if you apply for a grant, there's basically 2 criteria. There's the technical merits of it, but there's also broader impacts. They don't necessarily do a great job, but it's at least a sign of a way in which you could imagine better jobs in which larger scale projects would integrate fundamentally. If you're going to have funding from an important source, and you're not going to be able to do this without the funding, you should think, about how to have teams that can handle both. What's behind door number 3? I guess all I can do is echo here. Look, do I think we're going to have digital luxury communism? I don't. But if I were to indulge that, I would say, Look, it's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. So long as there are always constraints, and jobs aren't the only forms of constraints, there are always opportunities to do the things that we love in new and ever challenging ways, and we could imagine AI and ML creating all kinds of new fun environments that would strain us even further to produce new sort of challenges that we would love to rise to the occasion of.
Wonderful. Rich?
Hey, I think I'll just jump to my summary or final thoughts. And it's basically, it all comes down to diversity and interconnectedness. We are diverse, and that's great, and really what makes our society powerful. And our interconnectedness moderates our individual goals, because the only way to be really effective is to work with others, to collaborate. Yeah, and so what's the meaning of life? Well, I think our human ambitions and our goals and our diverse wants is totally scalable, and as we have more resources and more luxury time, we will scale our ambitions, and that'll work really well.
Wonderful. And Brenda, do you?
I think it's really interesting that on the one hand, we're all told we work too much and we need to scale back and we need to appreciate life and enjoy the journey and move to France when we have to work 35 hours a week and not have emails on weekends. And at the flip side of that, we're told that there's a future in which we don't have to work and we all panic and think that we can no longer find meaning in our lives. So I think that that's a conundrum we all need to solve for ourselves, as it's not going to happen in our lifetime anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now I'm going to pass the conch to Dan for 15 seconds.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you all very much for participating through our highly experimental online interaction approach that we've tried for today, and it was an imperfect system, but I really appreciate all of your involvement and your response to what's been happening. So thank you so much for that.
Wow, and look what happened.
Yeah, I know, right? We
That-
did it, Ted. We
That's-
did it.
That's like social dynamism in real time.
I also want to say that the Slack channel will persist, and I would really encourage all of you. There are so many great questions on the Slack channel. Please continue those conversations. Use that as a resource to keep this conversation going amongst yourselves, because that's what's going to be important. Thank you, Ted.
And to the panel, thank you so much for your wonderful remarks, your response to impossible questions, and your benevolence and insight. And thank you for your engagement and your wonderful questions. The proceedings are adjourned.